Racist cop humiliates quiet black woman, then regrets it when he learns who her son is. She sat quietly at the corner table, just a tired mother trying to enjoy a cup of coffee after a long shift. She didn't speak, didn't complain, yet one officer decided her silence was disrespect. With a smirk of authority, he poured coffee on her lap as if to remind her of her place. The cafe froze. No one stepped in, no one helped. But this woman carried a connection more powerful than anyone in that room realized. What happens when you humiliate the mother of someone who was born to fight injustice? Margaret Johnson was the kind of woman who rarely drew attention to herself. A soft-spoken single mother, she worked double shifts at a nursing home just to keep the lights on and food on the table. She didn't complain, didn't ask for favors. She believed in dignity, kindness, and raising her only son with strong values. Most mornings started before sunrise, and most evenings ended with her feet aching, but her heart full of pride. Her son, Daniel, had grown up watching her struggle and sacrifice for him, and he had promised himself that one day he'd make her proud. On this particular afternoon, Margaret stopped by a local cafe, a small reward after a long day. She ordered her coffee, found a quiet corner seat, and simply exhaled. People came and went, barely noticing her. She was used to being invisible, and she didn't mind. But on the other side of the room sat Officer Bradley Turner, a man quick to judge and quicker to abuse his authority. He watched Margaret with disapproval, seeing her silence as arrogance. He had dealt with people like her before, or so he thought. The air felt normal, calm, routine. But there was something uneasy about the way he kept staring. Margaret had no idea that one simple act of disrespect was about to turn her peaceful day into a public display of cruelty, and that the son she had raised in silence would soon respond in a way no one expected. Officer Bradley stood up slowly, his boots deliberately making noise as he walked toward Margaret's table. She looked up, startled, unsure if she had done something wrong. He didn't ask if she needed help, didn't greet her. Instead, he leaned over and spoke with a cold tone, telling her she'd been sitting too long and should leave if she wasn't buying anything else. Margaret quietly explained she had just finished her coffee and only needed a moment to rest her legs, but her politeness only made him more condescending. He muttered, loud enough for others to hear, that people like her always tried to take up space without paying. Margaret's hands trembled slightly, but she stayed calm. She stood up to leave, but as she reached for her bag, Bradley suddenly grabbed her empty cup and poured what was left, warm, bitter coffee, directly onto her lap. The crowd gasped, a few people whispered in shock, and others turned away, afraid to intervene. Margaret's eyes welled up, not from pain, but from humiliation. She didn't scream, didn't fight back. She just froze, holding her wet clothes with shaking fingers. Bradley smirked, waiting for a reaction. When she stayed silent, he sneered and asked if she had a problem. Margaret quietly turned away and walked toward the exit. The manager, clearly nervous, mumbled that he was sorry but did nothing to stop the officer. Margaret stepped outside, her heart pounding, her clothes stained, wanting only to disappear from the shame. But this time, something inside her broke. Instead of going home, she pulled out her phone and made a single call. Not in anger, but with calm certainty. She whispered only a few words. "Daniel, I need you." What Bradley didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just her son. He was now a highly respected civil rights attorney, known for exposing racist misconduct. Within 30 minutes, Daniel arrived at the cafe with 2 other legal aides. He didn't yell or threaten, he simply asked for the security footage. Bradley's arrogant smile vanished when Daniel introduced himself and said quietly, "You poured coffee on the wrong woman." The cafe fell silent. Even the manager stepped back in fear, realizing who had walked in. Bradley's face lost all color as Daniel reached into his briefcase, and in that moment, everyone knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Officer Bradley tried to keep his posture confident as Daniel calmly placed a stack of legal documents on the cafe counter. The tension in the room felt electric. Every eye was on the suited young man with a commanding presence. A presence the officer wasn't expecting. Daniel outlined the harassment, the public humiliation, and the clear video evidence of misconduct. His voice never rose, but each word landed like a blow. Bradley's hand twitched slightly. Near his belt, a reflex he couldn't control. He had dealt with angry citizens before, but never someone who used the law like a weapon. Margaret stood silently behind her son, still shaken, but now surrounded by a new kind of power. Daniel laid out the possible charges: civil rights violation, assault, abuse of authority, and racial targeting. The cafe workers began to whisper. A few people took out their phones again, not to record abuse this time, but to record justice unfolding. Bradley's breathing grew heavier as Daniel leaned closer and said, "You humiliated my mother in front of everyone. Now the entire country is going to see what kind of officer you really are." The officer's face turned red with a mix of fear and rage. For the first time, he realized he had lost control of the situation completely. A manager muttered that they would provide the footage. Bradley stepped back, sweat forming on his forehead, suddenly unsure if he would keep his badge after this. Daniel didn't threaten him with violence. He threatened him with accountability, and in that moment the power shifted. Not through force, but through truth, ready to be exposed to the world. Officer Bradley was placed on immediate suspension, as word spread through the community. News outlets picked up the story within days, and social media erupted with anger and solidarity. People who had ignored stories like this in the past were now forced to watch the footage over and over. A silent mother, a smug officer, a cup of coffee turned into a symbol of cruelty. Margaret didn't celebrate his downfall. She simply returned to work, carrying herself with quiet strength. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt invisible. Daniel followed through with legal action, not out of revenge, but to set a precedent. He spoke on national television, reminding the country that respect shouldn't depend on status, title, or appearance. The cafe issued a public apology, and many who had turned away in silence now stepped forward, admitting they wished they had done more. Bradley's career began to crumble, not because of a loud protest, but because the truth had become undeniable. Margaret received letters from strangers across the country, thanking her for having the courage to stand through the humiliation and for raising a son who turned pain into justice. Yet she knew this victory was just one small step in a much bigger fight. This story wasn't just about a single cop or a single moment. It was about the thousands of quiet injustices that happen every day, when no one is filming and no son is there to defend. The question is, how many more mothers have to suffer before people open their eyes and finally say, enough?